Hey y'all, I'm Hope here at Crafty Hope and welcome. I am sharing with y'all today my index card a day cards 49, 50, and 51. As you can see, first I started this first card going through a tin full of fun assemblage elements. We'll get to that in a second. Let me tell you about ICAD. That is a challenge that comes from Tammy Garcia, who you can find as Gypsy999 on Instagram or on her website, which is Daisy Yellow Art. I'm going to put a link to Tammy's site and all that below. Tammy offers up this challenge each June and July, in which the challenge is really just to take an index card, either a 3x5 or 4x6, and do daily art for those 61 days. To help inspire you for those days, Tammy does have daily prompts and weekly themes, but they're not necessary. If you are just inspired to create, go for it. You don't have to use the prompts. Now, granted, the challenge for this year has ended, but you can find those prompts online if you're just looking for some inspiration. In addition to Tammy's prompt, my friend Nina Fickett has additional prompts that she calls Mixed Media ICAD. And I write those prompts down on the back of each of my cards for as they get introduced, and then when it's time to create, I use them as a jumping off point. Somehow my battery must have died there and we kind of jumped ahead. Anyway, the two prompts for this first day in this video, the Daisy Yellow prompt was assemblage and the Mixed Media ICAD prompt was clothespin. Now, assemblage is one of my very favorite art forms. If you've seen anything from me, you probably know that I'm alternating these ICAD videos right now with my 100-day project videos, which has also ended, but I'm doing a lot of assemblage in that. So I was like, I know I can do that. And that's part of the reason I pulled out that tin full of lusciousness. So I started this card, as you saw, with some collage, sticking down all kinds of stuff, bits of paper and all that. I grunged it up a little bit using my Stabilo All pencil, which I did some scribbling, activated with some water, and was like, oh my gosh, that's too much. I need this to kind of all come back together. So I threw a little bit of white gesso on there and brayered over it, realizing at that point that I pushed it back far too far. So, yeah, I'm going to add a little more of that Stabilo to grunge it up. What I'm really trying to do here with it is get some of that texture. That's the sticker that came off the top of an old spool, like a thread spool. And yeah, it was on my desk, so I threw it on this card. So, and again, I'm taking this one too hard. Now I'm going to tell y'all the truth here. This set of 3 cards are kind of crazy, y'all. They are full on chaos. And it's probably not my 3 favorite cards. The third one in this is definitely my favorite of the 3. But each and every one of these cards has something in it that I really like, that when I was editing the pictures and the video for this, I was like, how did I do that? And that's what I love about this ICAD challenge, on this working small in a daily challenge, is that every day I get to explore, and I do it on these little 3x5 cards. It's not anything that has to be crazy or big or intimidating. Just doing a single card, whether I like how it turns out or not, I learned something. So here I'm doing one of the things I love to do, which is stamp with some of my hand carved stamps. And I'm using the same stamp. I first went in with Wild Honey Distress Oxide and then Rusty Hinge Distress Oxide. And I'm coming back in with a wet paintbrush to hit the edges of some of these stamps to blur them. So this card is super crazy. And again, like I said, there are elements to it you'll see that I like. At this point, day 49 of this ICAD journey, I had realized that what I really was loving, what was really drawing me to each of my ICADs, after 48 days, I was like, the ones I like the most are the ones that have the most 3D elements on. So these 3 cards definitely have some 3D elements to them. and I love those parts. But this one in particular, this is the part that I love the most. I grabbed some Payne's Gray acrylic ink, put it, you can see, in that little palette, splattered it with a fan brush, and I am going to dry it just a little bit. So you're gonna get to see me dry it. So I've sped this up a bit. So I dried it just a little bit. It's not dry all the way. And then I grabbed my distress sprayer, which just has some water in it, and spritzed it. So only the smallest drops and the edges of the bigger drops dried on this. So when I wet that, it ran, and some of the insides of those splatters are empty. The ink faded out of them, and y'all, I love that. Absolutely love that. So yeah, love that fact. So my 3D elements for this one, I had this bit of painty fabric that I had put some embroidery cross stitches on there in a mustardy color, and was like, okay, this is just going to go straight in the middle of this card, and I'm going to layer some assemblage elements on top. So I had this little Sucrets tin with all kinds of rusty things, and I ended up deciding I really like that rusty nail and that rusty safety pin. I'm going to end up deciding I just like the safety pin. Now, I haven't mentioned the Mixed Media ICAD prompt. I don't actually use a clothes pin in this one, but I do use the safety pin, which if you really want to cheat, I could say that that's a pin that goes on clothes. But that's hindsight. So I am not going through the fabric with that pin, but I'm going through some of the little X's I have on there. Those rusty pins can be real persnickety and get bendy and weak if you try to force it through a thicker fabric like I've got there. So I just went through the stitches and put that aside while I inked the edges of this card to frame it up with some I think that's walnut stain distress ink. So once that is done, I'm going to futz and futz. Now, y'all, I've also found that the cards that take me the longest tend to be the ones I don't like as much. Because if I'm struggling, I'm really going to let this go chaotic. So in the end, like I said, this card, not an absolute favorite, but working my way through it, finding some of the things I really liked, the elements that I enjoyed, is what is great about this ICAD project, or a daily project in general, is kind of going through those motions over and over again to find what you like and what appeals to you. Is that practice of it is so good for figuring out your style. So I felt that card, you can see in the background, was super dark and muddy-ish. So I'm trying to I've got 2 different Uniball Signo white gel pens. I'm just doing some scribbling on there. And it's not pulling up that bright white that I really want on there. So I end up getting this white out pen. This is it's a stationery supply from the office supply store, and I'm going to do those same kind of scribbles on there, and I love how much white this type of pen can give to you. So, and I don't even know what it's made out of, honestly, but it does a great job giving that pop of white that some of the other supplies I own wouldn't do, because these whiteout pens are designed to go over pen marks so they don't soak up other inks behind them the way that like a paint pen might, or a gesso might. Anyway, so you can see the light change there. I kind of got out my Fabri-Tac and let it get pulled to the top of that, and then I'm using the Fabri-Tac. I'm gonna stick down my little bit of stitched fabric with that safety pin on it, and then I think I'm gonna pull out, I've got some small talk stickers from Tim Holtz there. This one says Imagine on it. I do ink up the edges of it, and I'm gonna also add the Fabri-Tac to that before sticking it in the inside of that of that pen just kind of to frame it up, and I will glue the edge as best I can of that pen down, especially, like the head of that pen there's plenty of surface area on it to get it to stick down over the top of that word. And then once that's dry, y'all, this first card in this video is done, and we'll get to the second one, which is day 50 here in just a second. The prompts for day 50 are Trivial Pursuit and gel printed papers. Now, I'll admit, Trivial Pursuit used to be one of my absolute favorite games as a kid. I grew up in the 80s and, of course, grew up playing Trivial Pursuit. I still have my boxes of Trivial Pursuit games that, like, my parents owned that they gave to me when I moved out because they knew that was my kind of game. But I don't end up bringing that into this in any way. And I tried to figure out different ways to figure out if I could do little pie wedge pieces or the colors or even like a cute little question. I don't know. I could not think of a way to bring this in. The mixed media ICAD prompt, however, is gel printed papers, and you can see I pulled out this folder full of a bunch of my jelly prints, and I'm just kind of flipping through it because, yeah, who doesn't have a folder full of brightly printed gel prints sitting around? So if you don't, there are other ways to create something like that, but I decided to just bring these in and throw them down. I'm going to use my Uhu glue stick to stick them onto my card. And you can see I picked out a variety of really bright colors. I've sped this up quite a bit, y'all, because it's just me sticking these papers down. And this is going to end up being my favorite thing about this card are the bright colors I brought into it. So I don't know what happened there. I'm glad I sped that up. But yes, these super bright jelly prints, it's really my favorite thing that's going to happen in this card. The rest of what I do on this card, I like them individually, but all together, this card to me feels more chaotic than the previous one, even, honestly. But the colors, I've got to figure out some way. It's not commonly much of my side. I do tend to like a really grungy page, and as much as I like bright colors, I can't seem to get them to work with all the other things that I enjoy creating. I don't know why that is. So I've got quite a few, but I wanted to break up some of those colors a little bit so you can see I'm bringing in little bits of things that are just kind of sitting on my desk before I clean it up and trim the excess from the edges of this card, which I don't know, wasn't completely necessary, but I guess to me it helped tame some of that chaos. That makes me giggle a little because right now I've got the 100-day project is doing a 21-day project currently, and I've decided to tame the craft chaos that is my craft room and office. So yeah, anytime I'm talking about taming the chaos, that's all I'm thinking about is doing more organizing. So I do go ahead and right here at the beginning of this, ink the edges of this card. I think this was me just trying to have some busy hands while I tried to figure out what I was going to do next. And what I decided to do was bring in some white and just doodle on top of all of these bright colors. Black, I suppose, could have worked, but I really wanted that bright pop. So I'm starting with a Posca paint pen, as you can tell, but for some reason, I think my Posca paint pen is just about emptied out. So I'm going to end up bringing in a Sharpie paint pen there. It's a Sharpie water-based paint pen that I'll end up using for the rest of the doodling on here. The Posca, for some reason, just wasn't giving me that bright pop of white that I really wanted. Now, I am determined also in here to do a variety of different doodles for all these different surfaces, all these different areas. So every doodle I'm going to put on here is going to be just a little bit different. So there's like basically sections of these doodles. So I've got lines and dots, and I think I do some like rectangles, and here's some circles, and Yeah. And this was also my attempt to kind of uh make these pieces feel a little more cohesive. So, and this was a lot of fun. I do love to have busy hands and do some doodling and things like that, but yeah, this is not my favorite card. Yeah, but it was a daily project. I came in, it gave me some time to create, it let me explore my materials and things I had on hand, and was what happened on day 50 of this 61-day project. So from there, I think I felt like stitching something. I knew I kept having an image of like stacked fabrics in my head. So I've got this little zippered pouch that's full of a variety of different fabric scraps. And you can see I am just making a little stack. I've got a little piece of blue jeans, a little piece of like a flour sack towel. There's, oh gosh, I don't even know what that was. Some kind of coffee dyed fabric. Um, Here's some rust dyed fabric that, nope, not going to use that. So I am just sorting through these and making a stack. I'm trying to make sure as I make this stack that the whatever I put behind something lends to showing the piece of fabric above it. So it has to be like a different color in some way so you can see the frayed edges or the edges in general of it. So once I get this little stack made, I decide, all right, let's stitch it together. And I just happen to have some, oh y'all, it's kind of a greeny color of embroidery floss in that was up already on my pin cushion. So I'm going to use it, and because it didn't really matter. I've got so many colors going on in that background, it really didn't matter what color thread I used. But I was feeling like stitching a little stack together. So I'm trying to hold these together, and I'm just kind of going in from that center point, that denim, and then going out, making sure I catch as many layers as I can to do this. So it kind of is like a starburst out from that denim, and leaving the center open a little bit because that would give me an opportunity to put something in that center. Now, I'll admit I edited out what I thought I was going to put in, which was a broken paintbrush, like just the end part that, pops out when you leave your paintbrushes in water for too long. I don't know who does that. It's certainly not me. It's absolutely me, y'all. So anyway, I tried to flatten out one of those paintbrushes and put that on there, and it didn't work. So again, I told you I've really been into adding the 3D elements on these cards. They're what I really been enjoying. So that's why I tried to add that, but I'll end up finding something else. We'll get to it here in a second. Once I made my little starburst pattern there, you can see I am tying off I don't even know if I tied it off. I think I just went through the fabric a little because I knew I'd be gluing this down, and made sure that the end was just kind of tucked underneath, like sewn underneath there, and I trimmed it flat. Now that I have that there, I'm realizing that I want more of those white marks around on that background. And so that's what I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing, or adding more little, whatever. I was trying to come up with different shapes of different marks. So I'm like, okay, little dots. I can do little dots, lots of little dots, more little dots. How about some dashes over here? How about just filling up the space with as many little different pieces. So I moved this around for a bit, and did I go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and set up my Fabri-Tac there to go ahead and start oozing to the top. And that's where I clipped out that bit of fiddliness with the paintbrush. And what I came back and decided to use instead is this, I guess it's chipboard butterfly. It's from the Dollar Tree. They've got all those little chipboard shapes. And so I pulled that out, and I'm going to paint it by putting some black acrylic paint on my little 3x5 jelly plate. This is my favorite way I have found to apply paint to little chipboard or pieces that have lots of little holes in it, so the holes don't get too clogged. If I just put it down on there and tap it a couple times, this has been my favorite way to paint these things. So once I get that painted, it looks like maybe one or two of the little holes were clogged, so I cleaned those real quick with a T-pen, and now I am going to pick up the excess paint from my jelly plate and clean my desk off real quick, and we'll come back here with all of these things. Now, I felt like the butterfly needed some interest to it, and I don't know why. That card is already feeling like crazy sauce, but yeah, I needed more than just a black butterfly. So I've got my, what is it? It's the Liquitex acrylic ink in bright gold. So I'm splattering that on my butterfly, and then I will dry it and then decide from there that I needed some silver as well. So this is some Dr. P.H. Martin's India ink and a silver. I think that's what it is. I think I picked it up on clearance. So I'm also going to splatter it onto my butterfly and dry it. Chaos, y'all. Chaos has reigned in this card because it's got all of the colors. It's got that stack of fabric. It's got this splattered butterfly. It has all the things. Too many things. But that's kind of the theme, like I said, of this set of 3. They're all a bit much. It's a bit much. So now I am trying to figure out where I wanted to put these elements down. And it just needs to be done. So you look at me thinking still. So I'm moving things around. I've decided what I need is some black splatter in the background to kind of help ground that butterfly and bring the black that's on that butterfly onto the card. So I've taken that same black acrylic paint, watered it down a little bit, and I'm doing black splatters on the background. And I start to dry it just a little bit, but then I'll realize, nope, I need more black splatters. So, yep, more black splatters going straight on there. And then I will dry it completely before finally coming in and gluing the stuff, y'all. By the time, oh wait, I'm not even there yet. I've pulled out my Tim Holtz metallic stickers, but mostly because I've got all those metallics on that butterfly, and I thought, oh, I need something metallic else on this card. So I picked out the sentiment that says free to fly because, well, it's a butterfly, so yeah, gotta have something that's very literal. And then finally use that Fabri-Tac that was slowly eking its way out of that container. Put it on my little fabric stack. You can see that, yep. Put it on my sentiment, and then I will finally put it on my butterfly and stick it down. Once I get my butterfly down, I'll decide that I do not have enough of that outside edge of that card inked up, so I'll come back in and ink up the edges again with more of that walnut stain distress ink. Again, I'll give you a quick look at this card, and then we'll get to the last card of this video, and yeah. Okay. As I mentioned at the start of this video, this last of these 3 chaos cards is my favorite. The 2 prompts for it were clue and analogous colors. I end up not using either one of those. I'm sure I know what analogous colors means, but I didn't really want to deal with any kind of color theory and all of that and pull out my color wheel, and I just wanted to play and experiment, and that's kind of what I did in this one, and I wound up with something that isn't exactly like something I would normally make, but something I ended up really liking and something I want to remember, the bits that I really like about it. So, and for clue, oh yeah, I think knowing that the day before was Trivial Pursuit, I'm thinking that was the week that all of Tammy's prompts were games. So, yeah. I think I end up using one or two of them eventually. We'll see how the next set goes, but yeah. So here you can see I pulled out quite a few things to collage onto my card, but the first thing I decided to do was to put down some brown paint. I think that's all this color is called. You can see I got it on clearance, I think at Walmart. So I put it down. It's a Daler Rowney paint, I believe. But just a brown. And then I scribbled with my Stabilo. I am going to activate it lightly with some water, not much, because that paint is still wet, and I'm just trying to darken it up a bit. And I think partly because a few of the things that I pulled out from my scrap box were going to be transparent once I put them down. So and this card does end up being very browny, kind of in the background, very grungy, and but I kind of love it. So, I fiddled with that for far too long, didn't I? So once I got it dry, I am starting with collaging these papers down using some fluid matte medium. And yeah, I've got just a variety of papers there too. So there's some, what is it? The Artist Almanac, along with some like scrapbooky type patterned papers. I've got tea bags, papers that I have experimented on and embossed with. It looks like a postage stamp. It's something somebody sent me. More patterned papers. Like I said, I've got a tea bag in there, and there's also a bit of like, I don't know what you'd call that paper. It's like a tissue paper, and it's blue. That's the best way I can describe it. But it's sturdier. That piece. I don't know. It's blue, and it's going to lead me to do other things. And here's the tissue paper, and you can see this not tissue paper, tea bag. It's a tea bag. Oh my gosh, y'all. So some of these thinner papers kind of disappear a bit once I put them down with that fluid medium. All right, so lots of different things. I think, this may be one of the last pieces, which is a piece of craft cardstock that I had embossed, and I think I don't even know what that metallic is. It could be foundry wax on top of it. Not super sure. And then I had this big circle. It's not a circle. It's an oval that I had cut out of a piece of notebook paper that had some pencil writing on it, and it becomes like a key element to this, at least to me. It is the thing that stands out the most on this card for some reason, and probably one of my favorite elements. But I wanted to kind of integrate things, so I grabbed Stabilo Woodies, and because that little stamp that's on there has that pink tone to it, I think that's why I went with the pink on there to kind of help integrate that. And then I grabbed, this is some Liquitex Basics paint. I think the color's like light blue or something. I'll put it in the description box below if you want to know what it is for sure. And I'm using my finger just to paint it on there. As you saw, I added a couple elements that had blue tones in it. So again, I'm trying to integrate some of the colors that are on there. Now, I almost immediately knew I put too much of that blue down. It was taking away from the browns I had on there, so I blotted it up with a paper towel. Wasn't quite enough, so I'm going to come back in with a baby wipe and wipe away little bits of it. And it's really odd for me. I did not activate that Woody, which is a water-soluble crayon, and that's unheard of for me, y'all. But I was really loving the bold marks it kind of made on there, so I let that be. And then again, I grabbed that Stabilo all pencil, and I think I was trying to push back that blue a little and bring a little dark in the that upper area. So I'm activating it, but it almost immediately started turning that notebook paper gray. And I was like, no, don't do that. So I picked it up real quick. And I'm going to do some mark making with that Stabilo just kind of in the center. I think that was partly because that piece of embossed cardstock I had put down that line of it felt so, it just stood out so much, and I needed something else dark on there so it wasn't so so much of a statement. Does that make sense? I wanted it to kind of just blend into that circle. So I've got all of that in there. I'm pretty sure I'm probably going to dry this so that the bits of paint and water and everything else I've got on there dry a little bit. And then I'm going to, what am I going to do next? Let's try it. Let's try it and we'll see what happens next. I decided to add a little bit more of that blue paint because I'd pushed so much of it back, and that part isn't even gonna matter because And then for some of my 3D element that I decide to add to this card is going to be some French knots. I do love me French knots. I'm using some off-white embroidery floss, but it's only like 2 or 3 strands of it. This was something I think I already had torn down and in my pin cushion. No, maybe not. I can see there the bobbin of it. So maybe I decided to do it myself. But anyway, so I'm going to, in this upper left corner that is very brown, add both this pop of white along with texture by doing these French knots. Now, I feel like almost every one of my ICAD videos I mention how to do them, but you come up through your substrate, wrap the end of your thread, or the closest to your substrate, around the needle several times. The more times you wrap, the bigger and thicker your knot will be. And then you go back in through your surface, your fabric or paper or whatever you're sewing onto, but you do it in a slightly different spot than you came up through, so you don't pull that thread all the way back through. And that's a French knot. There are definitely some videos out there I'm sure you can find that explain it way better and not sped up 4 times like I've got it here. I've sped it up so fast because this is just kind of me going and going and going. Now I think at this point come to the realization that a lot of times when I do something like French knots, I try to keep it minimal. I'm like, oh, don't go overboard. You don't want the whole thing to be French knots. But y'all, why? Why don't I want it all French knots? I love them. Why would I not cover as much of an area with French knots as I could? So that's kind of what I'm doing. I am adding French knots all over this upper left corner. And I'll finally say, okay, that should be enough for now. And I'm going to tie it off. You can see I didn't add any to, I don't know, the other areas. I want to, and I wanted it to feel like it was bleeding off a little bit of that white oval we've got there, but kind of leave that blue and that pink and all separate so that it has its own feeling. So we've come to the point that I thought, okay, let's find a focal piece that we can add in here. And I pulled out, I've got this pencil box full of different things that I call focals. And I sorted through it for a few minutes. We're going to skip ahead here in just a second to where I find what I end up using, which is this picture of these 2 girls. I think this was out of a yearbook, and it had actually been a picture, I think, of 4 girls, and I cut 2 of them off and then threw these 2 in that box. So I put them down and was like, yeah, do they make a statement? Are they too dark? Are they okay? But yeah, you can see me holding it up, thinking about it. I'm going to trim them down a little bit so they're not leaning. And I think at this point I'm like, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to use. So tapping my fingers, that means I'm thinking. I put my box away and I decided that's what I'm going to use, but I wanted to add a little softness. The straight edges of how that was trimmed were throwing me off. So I pulled out this little piece of fabric here that has a bit of a frayed edge. And you can see I'm kind of holding my finger where I want to tear the other side. And yep, trimmed it a little, tore it down, and I am going to use my glue stick, I think, to stick that, is it a yearbook photo type thing? Yeah, to it. And you can see I'm kind of ruffling that fabric, trying to make sure all the edges are frayed and all that. And I'm going to look at this for far too long because remember, this video is sped up. So it's not just me looking at the amount of time you see me looking at it. At this point, it's 2 times the speed. So I inked the edges with more of that Distress ink in walnut stain. Here, I'm going to go ahead and stick it onto the fabric. And Oh goodness, what do I do from there? I think I'm going to add a few. I'm going to go ahead and stick them down and then add a few more French knots to that lower right corner and bring that same texture and those spots of white to another area on the card. So pulling out that same thread, you can see I don't have much of that thread left. So I was like, okay, let's make it work. So I'm going to, come in and start adding more French knots right there in that right corner. I didn't speed this up because, well, there's not much of it. I don't put but a couple down here because I don't want to detract or distract too much from that focal there, but I do want that continuation of that effect of the colors down there. So I'm gonna look at it. It takes me to, I go ahead and I tie this off. We're gonna come back with it more in a little bit, I think. I tie this off, and then what do? I pull out it's a little international coffee tin with clippings of words, and I find one little sentiment that Hermana was brisk. But since it was two of them, I felt that wasn't right. And so immediately I find this one that says the wild ones. And I was like, yep. That's it. This card felt wild. The look on these two girls' faces looks like they're about to get up into something. So I trimmed that sentiment down, then inked the edges of it just like I did the girls. And so I'm going to ink that up. I may even go ahead and stick it down. Let's see. I think so. I'm going to contemplate something else first. Committing. Takes me a minute to commit. So I use a Ooh glue stick to go ahead and stick that down. And then I'll ink the edges of my card with that same, again, distress ink that I've used on everything else. And I felt like I needed more ink. That's the first time I've inked that, and I think that I've used that in all three of these cards, haven't I? So you can see this doesn't feel completely like me, but y'all, I really love this little bit of play. So what did I do? I took my card to the sewing machine, added these light blue pom-poms to the edge of it. I really liked that, but there was a little hiccup, I think, in my sewing of it. So I've pulled out more of that same thread, and I'm going to help use that to tack down both the pom-poms and put in more of that those French knots, more of that color in that lower right corner. So lots of little 3D elements, the French knots, the pom-poms, even that bit of that oval. It's not 3D, but it adds just this striking element. So here I am. I think one of those pom-poms was super wobbly, so I'm doing what I can on the back side here to get it sewn down. And once I get it done, that's going to be it for this card and this video. I'm going to give you a look at all three of these cards so that you get to see some of the details of it. If you have any questions about any of this, don't hesitate to ask, and I do encourage you to do a little bit of play. A small substrate like these index cards are great, or even just take some notebook paper and cut it down into 4 pieces and just play on that. Experiment with your supplies, figure out what feels like you, and just a little bit of art every day is really good. So I encourage you to do that. I hope I've inspired you, and I will see y'all later with more craftiness. Thanks for watching. Bye.